now your hosts, Sarah and Chad.
Hello, everyone. You have made your way to Paranormally Correct once again on Thursday nights. I'm introducing the show. Oh my God, it's so weird. Chad can't be with us tonight. He's feeling a little under the weather. So I have a special guest host, Jenny Stewart.
Hello. I get to be Chad tonight. But I promise I'll let you talk. I will let you talk.
Oh, no, feel free to just jump right in there.
I'll do my best. I'll try to make Chad proud.
So tonight is a very big show for us. We've promoted it some on Facebook, and a lot of you know. And I know a lot of you are probably ready to call in tonight, so we'll have those numbers out for you as soon as possible. So there's been some apparently really good UFO sightings lately. There was one in Mansfield, Ohio, which I used to live in Mansfield, so that's kind of cool. I wish I had been there hanging out to see this one. There was one in Huntington Beach, I think, and a pretty good one in Australia, and there was actually a video for it. Apparently, all of these videos, it's going around the internet that they're all fake. Have you heard anything about this, Jenny?
No, but that is something that the little research that I have ever done on UFOs, I've noticed that a lot of them are, and that was one of the questions that I definitely want to ask our guest tonight, is how you, if you interview someone that's like a potential, someone that's actually said they had an encounter or spotted one, how can you tell if it's real or not?
Yeah, I think that's, yeah, exactly. And especially in these last few sightings, apparently they're, amazing sightings. And one of them was actually captured on film, one of them that I know for sure. I think one other was. But the one that was in Australia I thought was really interesting because the video is just, it looks cool. It looks really cool, but it looks a little too good. So I don't know. I'll post it on the Facebook page later and maybe everybody can check it out and let us know what you think about it.
So do you think it's like people that put up you see these videos of paranormal investigations, people put up like these full body apparitions and they go to all these like really elaborate extreme measures to create a fake, a sighting of like something paranormal. I guess, is that why people would do that with the UFO sightings as well? Because I think it would be cool to see a UFO. Personally, I just think it would be awesome. And my aunt and uncle actually many years ago in Michigan claimed to have had a encounter, and they don't talk about it a lot, but they do talk about it. And I always thought it was really intriguing to hear their story.
Oh, I love UFO stories. I could listen to UFO stories forever. Oh, I love them. But I think that this probably happens a lot because if you've ever gone to YouTube and tried to search for new paranormal videos or, UFO or crypto stuff, you're always going to come up with the goofy stuff, there's Butchie Kid, I think, is the name of the user on YouTube. He makes the greatest Sasquatch videos ever. They are so hilarious. They're just the funniest videos, but they're fake. They look good. Yeah. But I think they do it because there's such a fascination right now with paranormal stuff and supernatural things and the unexplained. And they think, all right, I'm going to get some YouTube views out of this. But
I think it's like with anything else, though, the more, fraudulent type of videos that circulate, the harder it is for people that really do have those really cool encounters. Excuse me,
exactly.
To get theirs to the forefront and say this wasn't faked, because I notice and I keep relating to paranormal things because I am a researcher of paranormal. I noticed that there are people that actually legitimately put valid, really cool paranormal pictures, like a full body apparition, and you're going, oh my God. And then you get these people going, that is such a good picture that there's no way it could be real. So I'm wondering too if that happens in the UFO field. To me, I would think that it would. You get a really cool video of actually a sighting, and then nobody wants to believe it because it is such a good sighting.
Exactly. And I think that we're conditioned to instantly assume that any kind of unexplained video that pops up on the internet is fake because, that's really all we've had so far. If there was a handful out there that were real, we would never know because, if people like Butchie Kid, which, I love Butchie Kid, but still.
The names as well. Butchie
Kid. Yeah.
Oh, God. Now I'm going to have to go look him up. Though. I'll have to look him up after the show. Just because of the name.
Everybody. Yeah, exactly. Everybody right now is like, oh, let's turn this Paramania down so we can check out YouTube. Stop it. Stop.
Yeah. Wait, because there's a really good guest tonight because of the research that I've done. I'm very intrigued by it, and I hope I didn't scare him off by saying that it's not, and it really isn't. UFOs are not an area that I've really done a lot of research, but I am very fascinated because it's a type of paranormal occurrence that is very intriguing to me. I mean, and I'm honored that I get to hang out and pick his brain tonight.
Well, hopefully, we're going to have a super duper good time and we're going to tell some awesome alien stories. So, I guess without further ado, we can go ahead and bring him on. This is the director for the Center of Physical Trace Research. He is world renowned UFO researcher, Ted Phillips. Ted, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks.
Welcome.
And we just had our first burst of heavy rain and thunder. I can't wait. I'll forewarn you, I have my two security dogs down here with me in the office. The office building is, if a tornado should come through, I think we'd have the best shot here, and because of the structure. But I have a Great Pyrenees Old English sheepdog of about 150 pounds, and I have a 70-pound Golden Retriever Great Pyrenees mix, and you talk about paranormal research. Those two are the best, man. They will put you onto something, and they actually they're excellent at sensing approaching storms also, which is kind of the order of the evening. But this stuff is coming right out of Oklahoma. I'm in extreme southwest Missouri, right in the line. So anyway, if you hear a very loud bark or a howl, you'll know I'm in trouble. So
We'll keep a listen for that, and hopefully it didn't happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, you run for a storm shelter somewhere. Don't hesitate. Just throw those headphones or that cell phone and just take off running.
We'll know that you're gone for shelter. So I grew up.
I was going to tell you, if the phone goes dead, that means I'm heading into the cellar. So
let me ask you a question now that we're talking about, huge weather occurrences. In your research, have you noticed any, I guess, a lot more sightings after there's been some very, some massive, like the tornadoes, some of the devastating weather-related things that we've had happen? Do you ever notice that there's afterwards there's more sightings of UFOs afterwards? Do they kind of collate in any way?
That's a really, really great question because of late, over the last 5 years, I've noticed what could be a connection of light ball activity. And by light balls, I'm talking about small spheres, anywhere from a couple of inches, baseball size, up to a beach ball in size. And they are very brightly self-illuminated. And there seems to be, at this point, statistically, a greater opportunity to see the light balls either an hour or two before or after electrical storms. And, of course, these things, which I have measured, do emit a great deal of electromagnetic power. And enough to, about 2 weeks ago, Rodney Dillard and I were up on a farm where there had been a very recent Bigfoot sighting and some tracks. And I got to throw this in. 5 years ago, I wouldn't even talk about big feet, but I've ran into enough events, solid events, that I've really had my head turned, just as with the paranormal in the last 5 years. And but at any rate, we had all the camera equipment set up, and I mean a lot of cameras, different types of devices, EM meters and trifields and so on. And instantly, everything went dead, including our 2 cell phones. And all of this stuff we had double-checked was at max charge, and it was at 0. And I mean in an instant. And yet there was nothing visible. You couldn't hear anything. We had a good, clear view out in a very isolated area. And what was super cool is that this farm has no power lines, nothing that could produce EM within 6 miles in any direction. And so, you know, we can, the ghost hunters can walk around on TV and hold their EM meter up to an outlet on the wall and say, oh, well, this is why they're seeing things and so on. None of that could have been responsible up there. And I've had down through the years a lot of cases where automobiles heading down the highway, and all of a sudden they see 3 small lights flying alongside the car, or a light over the car, or whatever, and the automobile engine just dies. The lights all go out. It has no power whatsoever, the entire electrical system. And when the object leaves the vicinity, in most instances, everything comes back on and works fine. In some of the cases, however, the automobile engine was damaged, actually to a point where the engine had to be replaced. Generally, it is an effect on the power source, the battery, for the electrical system on the vehicle, but sometimes it goes beyond that. And you know, I've got to say that in the last 15 years ago, I was contacted and asked by property owners several hundred miles east of where I live to come investigate a series of UFO sightings that have been taking place on several farms in a relatively small area. And I almost didn't go because my main thing for the last 48 years has been the investigation of UFO landings where physical evidence is left behind, generated by the object or whatever. Anyway, something you can pick up in your hand. And so I almost turned this down, and the gentleman did say, well, I've got some bad ones, but I've taken some video. And I thought, well, I can drive that far to see this. And actually, pretty good video. The only reason they were bad videos is the guy, and to this day, will not put the camera on a tripod. And so you've got, you know, some people motion, but what's going on there, especially in instances where he would brace against a fence post or something and steady the camera, are actually very, very interesting. And in the almost 50 years that I've investigated this stuff, that is the only location where I actually have seen UFOs. I've traveled all over the world. I investigated cases in a lot of places, but I was always going in behind the event. In other words, the thing had been there, it had landed, it had generated some kind of ground effect and flew away. So I'm coming in, gathering data and samples and so on a sort of fingerprint that was left behind by the UFO, but never there when I could see the UFO. Well, this area that I was talking about, I named the Marley Woods, and simply because there was nothing anywhere in the area with those names. And the people, the only thing they asked was that I not divulge any names and the location, because they didn't want, 10,000 people knocking down fences coming in to try to see this stuff. And I agreed to it. I had to agree to that on a lot of the landing cases. And as I always like to say, I'm after the data not the names and the locations. Of course, I have those filed, so they go along with the case, but just can't use them. And so it is interesting. The EM effects have always been a great interest to me because I first saw them in the landing cases and in cases involving physical damage of one kind or another to automobiles or other mechanical devices. And way back in 1969, Alan Hynek and I were working with Texas A&M, and they were the big microwave guys back then. And we had thought that this was something akin to a microwave type of effect because the soil and plants, following the appearance of an object on or very, very near the ground, the soil and plants would be not burnt, not smashed, but dehydrated, sapped of all moisture, and dead as doornails. Well, the first thing that we started thinking was, what kind of effect would you get if you put these plants and soil in a microwave oven? And same thing. And so working with Texas A&M, we determined back in 68 and 69, that the objects were generating tremendous electromagnetic power. And, of course, that's just a common reality now. And you can take your handy K2 meter and go out and prove it to yourself, you know. So, anyway, that's part of this stuff that's fascinated me greatly.
So do you think paranormal encounters, I'm talking like paranormal, like ghosts and things like that, do you think that they have some kind of coalition, some kind of relation to UFO sightings, to UFOs?
Yes, I do. And 2 years ago, I would not have said that. At the Marley Woods, in the last 2.5 years, there has been the development of, and then a great increase in what is commonly referred to as paranormal activity. And one thing that Alan Hynek pushed into my brain was that you go where the information indicates. And in other words, you don't say, oh, well, I don't believe in paranormal, so I'm not going to look at this. It's not worth the time. If the events seem to be real and they're reported by credible witnesses, why not believe that they're having paranormal experiences if you would believe them about a UFO experience? And when we first began, 1968, Alan and I started working together, and he was my very best friend, aside, of course, from my wife, until he passed away in the 80s. And he saw to it that I was placed with the very top people in a lot of venues, a lot of areas, geology, archaeology, photography, et cetera, things that would be important in my research. And then he asked me in 1968 if I would concentrate on one type of case, that being the physical evidence left by the UFO type case. And so that's what I did until Marley came along. I still do it, but to much less of a degree, because those types of sightings have diminished. They have dropped off the charts. There was a point in time back in the early 70s when statistically we were getting, through the Center for UFO Research, we were getting a new landing case with physical evidence every 36 hours around the world. And that's a lot of stuff. And I'm not talking about YouTube stuff. I'm talking about extremely solid, highly credible, high strangeness events with daylight observations by multiple witnesses within 50 feet for a long period of time, and the finding of the physical evidence which couldn't be explained away. And but in the mid to late 80s, those types of cases where the 30-foot or 10-foot metal object rests on the ground and does all this stuff, flies away, and in 21% of those cases, there were little guys seen in association with the objects. 21% of 5,200 cases. And in over 90% of those, the little guys were little guys. They were 3 foot, 3.5 foot tall, thin, spindly bodies, and having what is kind of a typical humanoid figure today. And I had the opportunity to take compression tests at a number of sites of the small footprints allegedly left behind by the little dudes, and they indicated that the figure weighed about 60 pounds, which would be about right for a 3.5 foot tall, thin, spindly body. And so there, you're starting to talk about facts and figures. It's not just someone saying, I saw this. And in my YouTube comment, I'm not saying that all YouTube videos are fakes, but there's a lot there that I would want to have a much, much closer look at before I would consider it authentic. But it's great, it's there, I mean, I wish we would have had that sort of thing back in the 60s, 70s, 80s. And but when the in the 80s, when these large, what appeared to be metallic objects, those types of reports started going down, you can look statistically in this trace file of 5,000 cases and see that they were being replaced by the small light balls. And that's why I'm so interested in those today, because they're, in my field of investigation, those are the things most often seen. And I have actually witnessed some of those myself and photographed them. So, in the Marley Woods area, I have almost 250 witnesses. Not one has ever gone public. Because they're not trying to sell a story, they're not trying to sell a video or a DVD or anything. They've kept the stuff to themselves. Why make up a big lie and not tell anyone? And I was there, and I was trusted, and they know that I'm not going to expose them, so they tell me when they experience these things. And so it's been a fun trip in the Marley Woods, I'll tell you. Fascinating stuff. It's very much like the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah, in the types of activity and the fact that it's ongoing. And where I'm so lucky is that I have there, because these folks call me that long years ago, I have the ability to work in a living laboratory. And I thank goodness, as long as my health hangs out, that I can be there, because that's my thing, the field investigation and the research. So anyway, that was a long answer to your question, but it's a great one you made about the effects of electrical activity in the areas.
Oh, that was a terrific answer. I think we're all geeking out over here like, yes, this is awesome. I'm so thrilled, Ted, that you mentioned the thing about the damage to cars and car engines just mysteriously dying, because
yes.
I know a few people who have experienced that, and I think I may have experienced it with a friend one time. And as far as the theory that paranormal activity and UFO activity kind of goes hand in hand, I've heard that a lot, and I think that is a really fascinating theory that not many people merge together and really put out there. I mean, there's not a whole lot of opinions out there. Jenny, have you ever heard very many people really go into that?
No, and that's why I asked the question. And I'm now more intrigued by you than ever, because that's my area of research is paranormal. So I actually can see where it would kind of go hand in hand. And And I'm really impressed by the fact that you actually have come to that same conclusion. So, but I know I've not heard that
Hmm.
very often. I think you're the first person.
Well, I'm finding privately when I talk with some of the paranormal investigators that they are expressing interest in UFOs and the possibility of a connection, and I'm really thrilled to see that. As a matter of fact, I could have been knocked over with less than a feather it's probably 4 weeks ago now. Stanton Friedman called me, and he's an old bud forever, and I was totally amazed. He is pretty obviously an ET guy, and he, believes that ETs are building spaceships and they're coming here. And many years ago, I had that as a kind of high-placed theory myself. Alan Hynek always told me, he says, Ted, too simple. It's much more complicated than that. And by golly, he was right. But anyway, Stanton starts off the conversation after, how are you doing? You're still alive and all that. He said, I'm so pleased to see that you're starting to recognize and look into paranormal activity as possibly being connected to some UFO events. And that was the last guy that I would ever have expected to hear that from. So I think there are changes in thinking, and I'm not out preaching it, but I'm not ashamed to admit that if this stuff makes a turn to the right, I'm going to go to the right, and I'm finding a lot of interesting connections. For example, in the Marley Woods, we have the light blue baseball size light balls. And I don't use the term orb because that is too conflicted by dust particles and all that showing up with digital cameras and flash and all that. I've been able to get a lot of those. But the fact that these things are self-luminous, they have their own light production. They produce an EM effect. And in many of the cases, and I've seen some of these, you see the things flying 3-4 feet above a field. And I saw one night 10 feet away and several minutes. And so you have a lot of time to photograph it and see it and observe it and study it. And, okay, I'm looking at a UFO. Well, a few weeks later, one of the team members who was not in on that particular sighting, didn't know anything about it, called me, and she said, I got to tell you this, my grandson, 7 years old, was sitting in the living room this morning, and all of a sudden he starts screaming at the top of his voice, and obviously terrified, and then he starts crying, just really breaking down. She runs down the hallway and into the living room, and she said, what's wrong? And he was shaking, and he was just beyond himself. And she got him on the sofa and calmed him down, and she said, now what's wrong? What scared you? And he said, the light. And she said, what do you mean? He said, the light that came into the room. And finally, she got him, without any prompting, to describe a baseball-sized blue sphere that came down the hallway, made a turn into the living room, and it was right at face level. And it reached a point, the distance of his arm's reach would be about 1.5 feet, maybe. And that's the point where he screamed and started bawling and everything. It just scared him so badly. Okay. You have the blue light ball floating over the field out here, and I'm thinking UFO. When you have that same type of light ball inside a house, is it a UFO or is it a paranormal experience? And I'm seeing that coming together like that more and more and more. there was a case I investigated in Slovakia. I have a project in the high Tatra Mountains in Slovakia, and it involves an extremely old, large artifact a couple of miles back in a cave. But anyway, while I was in Slovakia on the first trip, I was talking to what would be a high school principal in the U.S. and his sports coach, and really credible guys. I mean, they didn't know anything about flying saucers. And one afternoon in daylight, they saw sitting on the ground about 150 feet away a metallic appearing object, 15, 20 feet long, and it was sitting there on four legs, not far from a heavy pine forest. And as they stood there and watched, they see this figure coming out of the forest, and it's wearing, it's smaller than a typical human, shorter, thinner, and is wearing some kind of gray suit, tight suit. And the thing walked up to the object, and instead of opening a hatch, it walks through the outer wall of this thing, disappears inside. Okay, that happens with the UFO case. Well, when something walks through a wall in the house, it's a ghost. And, the parallels are, I think, really there. And I damn sure think they need to be looked at sanely.
Absolutely. Yes, me too. I totally agree. And I know Jenny feels the same way. I think that there are so much, I personally have so many opinions on paranormal and UFO, extraterrestrial stuff. And I actually believe that, deep down within these bodies that we walk around in, I think that we are some form of alien. We are some form of energy like that. And I think that they're the ghosts that we look for, the spirits, the hauntings, and then the little grays and the little Martians that we see on TV. I think it's one and the same, really, at the root of it. Or, there could be some similarities beyond what any of us could imagine. But we've got so much to talk about. There's so many good questions just popping into my head. I'm jotting notes down as you talk, and I'm so excited. This is going to be so cool. But unfortunately, we got to take a break real quick. So we're going to do that, and we'll come right back, and we'll dig into some really serious alien stories. And I want to throw some out there too, because I know some good ones. So everybody, stick around. Right. This is Paranormally Correct, and we will be right back.
Paranormally Correct with Sarah Spencer and Chad McKenzie. We'll be right back in just a few moments. We now return to Paranormally Correct with Sarah Spencer and Chad McKenzie.
Welcome back to the UFO extravaganza, everybody. I'm your host, Sarah, and with me tonight is special guest co-host, Jenny Stewart.
Do I need to act like Chad? How does Chad do it? Hey, y'all. I can't do it. I love Chad. He's from Kentucky. I'm from Indiana, as you could tell, Sarah, and I have an accent, but I just don't know that I could do the whole. Yeah, no. Although I could do the cup suction thing like Chad taught me. So
yeah, he's perfected that. That's kind of a weird talent, but he's good at it. So
I have to tell him the Joe Chen story of Joe and I actually setting up a panel at a paranormal conference to do cup succubus panel. So
he will be really happy to hear about that.
Oh, anyway. Chad's probably thinking, oh, wow.
Well, in case you all just tuned in, just want to let everybody know who we've got on the show tonight. We are returning with Ted Phillips. And if you missed the first half of the show, you missed so many good stories, but it's not too late. So let's get right back into that stuff. I think we left off somewhere around sightings and reports and investigations. And I had something that, one of the things that I wanted to know so bad tonight when we did the interview, my number one question was, what was your very first experience with a UFO? When was the first time you ever saw one? Because a lot of people I've noticed that I talk to and, interview on the show especially, they'll always say, well, I was a kid. I was a small kid and I saw this or that. And I know I had my first UFO experience when I was pretty young. But I've had so many at this point that, I'm not bragging, but I'm bragging.
I hate to admit it, but after all those years of investigating, I had not seen a UFO, and so in 1998, I got the call, went to the Marley Woods, and for 4 months I didn't see anything. But at the fourth month, 1999, I was standing by this old windmill with one of the property owners, and it was still very bright twilight. The sky was illuminated very, very well. And so he and I are just talking, and he said, there they are. And I, which they were becoming kind of old hat to him because he'd been watching this stuff almost nightly. And so there they were. There were 3 brightly illuminated objects in a horizontal row, equally spaced apart, and they were taller than wide. They were kind of egg-shaped to the vertical. And around the outside edge, there was the weirdest blue, black, purple band that came down from the top of the object and around the bottom and back up the other side, with the top being open like it made a U. And in the center of all this was this really strange amber light. And so we started calling these things ambers. And so they weren't doing anything. They were just hanging there. And I'm totally amazed because this ranch, there is no sound. I mean, you could hear a pin drop for a great distance. And no sound from these objects. They're silently hanging there in the sky. No parachutes, no wings, no engines, no visible means of support, but they were there. And a 4th one came on, a little more to the northeast, followed by a 5th. And the 5th object was the south object, and it was closer than the other 4. It was, I estimated, perhaps 800 feet away and 500-600 feet above the ground. I could see it very, very well. And I have to admit, for the first time in my life, back in those days, I was also not much of a believer in portals. However, I'm standing there looking at these things, fully expecting something to come out of them or through them. That's exactly what they look like. They look like a vertically oval doorway. And but I mean, I was so taken back that after they finally they just disappeared into themselves, like the aperture on a camera lens, and they were no longer there. And I realized that I had the video camera running, and it was pointed at the ground. I was that taken by the sight of these things. They were so different than anything I would have ever expected. And I shot 1 minute and 37 seconds of the property owner and I describing and talking about them, and video of the gravel by my foot. And it's a little embarrassing, but had it been a large silver saucer with little guys crawling all over it, I would have got the whole 1 minute and 37 seconds of video, because that's what I had been trained to expect. And these things were, I mean, I'm used to them now. I've seen them many, many times, and in numbers up to 40 or 50. And I'm talking about having 31, 32 witnesses to all this, with all the equipment shutting down. And these things have also been seen on the ground, treetop level, in the trees, right up among the trees, and then coming down through clouds, which were at 3,000 feet. So they go to variable altitudes from the ground up. And that was my first sighting. And I'm telling you, I had investigated some really, really stupendous cases, some of the very best landing cases I was fortunate enough to investigate. And yet, I was totally taken back by this view. And the creepiest thing was that they could hang there without any visible means of support or audible sounds. It was just an impossibility.
It's really interesting to me that if you didn't have anything happen in your childhood, how do you feel like you navigated towards it anyway? I mean, because a lot of people who have never had an experience just say, well, I don't believe it because I haven't seen it. I haven't seen anything like that, and I don't think that it's out there because I would have seen it by now.
Well, you know, I as a pretty young kid at 7, and this was, oh my God, 1949, and not a lot of talk of flying saucers. It was starting a little bit, but at any rate, I had to go to the doctor, and so my mom bribed me by buying a copy of Mystic magazine, which was kind of like Fate magazine. It had ghost stories and UFO reports, flying saucers then. And so, man, I thought, this is the coolest thing. And so by the time I was 8, my dad, who was an incredible musician, and he had a friend, a good friend, who worked at the radio station in Sedalia, Missouri, and had been a pilot in World War II. And so my dad says, "Here, I want you to hear Bob's story." And so he introduced me to Bob Younger, and I can say that he's long passed. And Bob told me that he was on a flight. He was a pilot on a night bomber, night intruder bomber, and they were flying very close to Germany, and it was a huge complement of the night intruders. And all of a sudden, to the east, they saw this circular, brilliant white light, not real large, coming over the tops of all these bombers, and the bombers were rocking from some kind of air disturbance as it passed overhead. And so it was for sure something real, and being seen by a lot of crews. And after it passed over the last bomber, instantly it reversed its direction, didn't make a turn, reversed its direction, and flew back underneath the bombers, and again was disturbing the air, rocking the bombers. And boy, when he told me that, I was really hooked. And many years later, Alan Hynek and I were doing an investigation for CBS TV in Florida of a landing, and Bob Younger had moved to Florida, and he saw the live TV feed, and he had all those years had dug up all of the pilots, flight crew people, all of their names and contacts and everything from all those bombers for me to put with that case. And I mean, it was just an unbelievable case. And so I was hooked, and I proceeded on. I was extremely interested in astronomy, meteorology, and I stuck with that on up through the years. And finally, after slavery, I became an engineer. And so that's kind of the story. And I started investigating cases, landings, in 1964 with the Socorro, New Mexico landing. And I was there. Stan, oh my God, I can't think of his name. Anyway, and Dr. Hynek was there, Jim and Coral Lorenzen, who had the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization at that time, were there. I didn't know them, they didn't know me, and we didn't meet. But I did have the opportunity to talk to Lonnie Zamora, the officer that witnessed the landing along with others, 2 times. And then down through the years with Alan, we visited with him again 2 times. and extremely credible, extremely believable, and the case is a classic. And so I met Dr. Hynek in 1968 because of a landing, not a great distance from where I live right now, and 3 hunters in daylight had a guy walk by their campsite, and when he passed them several hundred feet up the trail, he said, "Hey, is that your campsite?" And they said, "Yeah." He said, "It's on fire, or it's smoking." And they could see the plume, and they headed for it, and the tent was totally destroyed. The outer aluminum support poles were all standing, and everything in the tent, $600 worth of equipment destroyed. And as they're standing there looking at that, they hear a humming sound, and this is 10 o'clock in the morning, low clouds, and they see this metallic object about, Bruce Maccabee tells me, about 25, 30 feet in diameter, coming up out of a hollow, and they could see structural detail on it. And one of the 3 witnesses always carried a twin lens camera for shooting photos of deer. And he grabbed the camera up and he shot 2 photos of this. And the top, he noticed, of a tree about 15 feet above the ground, between the tent and the object's location, the top foot of that tree was on fire. And so we wound up coming up with the idea that as the thing was coming in, it shot a beam of some kind that grazed the top of the tree and burned up the tent and so on. So we had the physical evidence, which we were able to analyze, and the material in the fire itself had been heated in excess of 3,000 degrees, which is pretty incredible. And all of the stuff was, I mean, totally ruined. And the photo, one of the 2 photos, second photo, it was picking up speed and it's pretty blurry. But the first photograph is the best UFO image I have ever seen. And this was back in 1968. And you can actually see a circular tower-like structure coming out of the rear top of the object and something coming out of it. And you can see that there is a raised portion around the upper top section of the object itself. And the guy that took the picture now is still living and is one of the top federal judges in this country. And so anyway, when I became aware of it and I tracked the guys down and I saw the pictures, I took a shot and I called Alan Hynek at Northwestern, and his secretary, lo and behold, put me through to him, and we talked, and he said, "Can I come down and we'll look into it?" And I said, "Yeah." So he flew down, and we met with witnesses. He took the negatives back up to Northwestern where they were analyzed, and he called me in a couple of weeks, invited me to come up to his home in Chicago, and Jacques Vallée was there, Fred Beckman was there, and Bill Powers, and spent a couple of days up, and Alan asked me to join the Invisible College, and I could hardly believe that, but it was pretty great stuff, and it went from there.
I would love to see that picture. I know it's probably not available for public viewing, but
I can send it to you. Email me and I'll send it. You bet.
Yeah, that would be so cool.
Now, I have a question, because, and this is going to sound probably one of the dumber questions, or one of the more generic questions, but any time I hear about like a UFO sighting or things like that, a lot of the cases that I've actually heard about have been close to water. Like, a lot of sightings have been around large bodies of water, like my aunt and uncle in Michigan. Do you feel like that there is a reason for that? I mean, for the water, or is that just a coincidence?
Well, let me tell you, I am not trying to be a name dropper. I'm just fortunate that I've got to know a lot of people. Carl Fent is the world's leading expert on underwater UFOs. Matter of fact, he has a book out, and they're doing a redo on it, and the new edition is going to be out in a few weeks. And at any rate, Carl and I have lectured together, and we've spoken at length. And I'm aware of, I've investigated a few underwater cases, and I absolutely think that, well, after talking to Carl, I'll put it this way. Why would they go in and out of water? Well, if they can travel through space or dimensions or whatever the devil they're doing, I'm sure water wouldn't be a big problem. And secondarily, what a great place to hide during daylight. And I say that because at Marley we've had light ball sightings with the things going into a large farm pond. And when they go into the pond, the water illuminates with a sort of reddish-orange color, and sometimes there is a disturbance of the water, and eventually they pop back out and fly away. And I've often, it has gone through my mind, where do these things go when they're not being seen? And do they go back through a portal? Do they go underwater? But it's all an open question, and I think it's a good one. There's a lot of water for stuff to hide in.
Yeah, I never knew if it was like a resource for them that they were looking for, if it actually had another, because it's a good conductor too, so I could see gravitating towards water.
Yeah, there have been lots of cases. Carl's files. I mean, it's amazing how many of the in and out of water cases, and sometimes going in or coming out very close to large warships in daylight. And some of that stuff has got to be true, just like my cases in the trace stuff. And we've had in the trace cases, actually, there have been a number of events where an object would be hovering above the water and sucking a column of water up into the object, obviously having some kind of use for it, and with physical disturbances on the bottom of the body of water, and so on, and out of ponds. So we get some physical evidence, not a lot, but some that way on the bottom of ponds. And so, there are a lot of sides to this stuff. And my God, I'm as fascinated by it today, after almost 50 years, as I've ever been. Actually, I think I'm more passionate now between the paranormal and UFO connections. I'm really stoked for that.
I just think that's so awesome about you. I'm so excited about that. I was actually typing that in the chat room that is so. It just really, I'm amazed because it's very hard to get sometimes other researchers in other fields and industries to actually acknowledge that there could be a collaboration between the two. And as you and I were talking about on the break, the bend in time, and I have different theories on parallel planes, and I just believe that it all it coexists together. It all comes together in the same spot.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I think you, instead of sticking your head in the sand, you need to aggressively look at the things that obviously are going on around you. And it's okay to ignore something if you just want to ignore it. But if you're doing research and investigation, you've got to look at this stuff from all possible sides. And if the data takes you here, that's where you go. You've got to do it. I remember down through the years, I would occasionally run into a landing case that had some asides of paranormal activity. There was a case up in Iowa where an entire family looks out the upstairs bedroom window of their old wood frame farmhouse, and here is an object 10 feet from the window, and it has some kind of a window-like device, and they can see a couple of guys in there, and they're looking at each other through the various windows, and the thing's there for a good long period of time, and it backs up and goes vertically and disappears, and they run downstairs, and these are all adults, and they run outside, and they had snow and ice, and where the object had been stationary, about 10 feet above the ground, there was a 10-foot circular area where the snow and ice was melted down to the soil, and the soil was totally dehydrated, dry, totally bone dry. And the cool thing, and I think back on this and it makes me sick, I didn't have the time to investigate this stuff, but when they went back into the farmhouse for the first time ever, and the mother had lived in this house for many years, plates were flying off of the shelves, poltergeist activity that you just can't believe. And this continued. And eventually it was followed by shadow figures, all kinds of activity, which had never happened in that house prior to this event. So you can laugh and you can say, well, there's no connection. I'm sorry, I can't see it that way.
I have to agree, and you were talking about the snow, and I'm going to tell you really quick, because I know we're going to have to go to break here in a second, a real quick story about me. I lived in a very active location up until last year. We dubbed it the Hell House, how, fondly we did that. It had a lot of activity, paranormal activity, but I remember one night, and it was in Maryland, we kept hearing helicopters flying really low over the house, and it was kind of like out of a movie. One came so low and then the lights flickered, like went off and then came back on really quickly, and it had snowed. There was fresh snow on the ground, and we lived kind of up on a hill, and from the edge of our driveway up to our basement window, there was a set of footprints that went up to the basement window, and that was it. There was nothing leading up to the where they started. There would have had to have been footprints walking up to that area, but there wasn't any. And it was really interesting when you kind of put that together with the helicopter and the footprints in the snow. I always wondered, as close as we were to some military bases, if they weren't looking for something, because it sounded like a military helicopter. So I just always found that it was kind of scary. My son went running out and messed it up before we could take a picture, but it was kind of like one of those. Well, it was one of those moments like you're like standing there with your mouth open, going, "Okay, how did that?" Because you're looking for the other footprints, and it's like right there. And you're just trying to figure it out, and there was because I've always, even in my paranormal research, I've always looked for the explainable. And when I can't explain it, that's when I start looking for the unexplainable. And we tried to explain it, but I get goosebumps even talking about it. It just seemed really creepy. And what was really weird, I just thought about this. About 2 years before, I had talked to you during the break about the case we did with the ghost box. I actually had, I guess they were agents from a government agency, after we did a TV show with that case, show up and want a copy of the raw audio from that case, which is really weird to me. It was really creepy that I had government officials wanting audio. But do you find that things like this, that people, you get that laugh, kind of like, do you find that people encounter just everyday people that just may not actually realize what they have encountered or they have going on, like with us now, the paranormal activity? Do you find that often, where people have those type of encounters where they just really aren't sure what they are?
Oh yeah. I've had now at Marley a couple myself. One thing that I can't talk about a lot at Marley at the request of the witnesses. Been a lot of very bad cattle deaths, and quite a lot, and really, really strange things like 4 adult Black Angus bulls overnight in a locked ranch, and with people around. I mean, you would never get a helicopter, couldn't drive a vehicle in. There's no way you're getting in that place without getting caught. And yet, overnight, these totally healthy 4 adult Black Angus bulls are found by the owner the next morning when he goes through, unlocks everything, and gets back in there. And they're lying in the same position on their backs in a straight row, equidistant apart, all 4 legs sticking straight up in the air, no visible means of death, and no blood, nothing taken. They're dead. Number one,
Wow.
how, without shooting these bulls, how would you control them to the point, or even move them around and position them like that? I mean, it was the most incredible thing. Well, those kind of events going on, incredibly hard to explain. I really think very few of the events that we're getting are the results of our government or the military. I don't pay any attention at all to sightings at night of large bat wing or triangular objects, simply because I believe those are ours, and those kind of devices exist, and there's no way that you can investigate it to the point where you can eliminate our military in those events. Now, we had recently a whole series of cases in Marley where the entire farm family sees this gigantic oval black object, and they can see the shape of it and the size of it because it's blocking out the stars. Beneath it, there are just countless small amber lights, and some of those lights come down to the ground, touch down, stay on the ground for some period of time, go back up, and or come out and fly around, all coming out of the bottom of this. And at one point, this thing was 30 feet above the witnesses.
And that reminds me a lot of the Phoenix Lights. I'm sure you all are familiar with that. And
Yep.
we got to talk about that when we come back from the break. So we're going to hop out of here for a second, play you some good songs, and we'll be right back. Everybody stay tuned.
Paranormally Correct with Sarah Spencer and Chad McKenzie. We'll be right back in just a few moments. We now return to Paranormally Correct with Sarah Spencer and Chad McKenzie.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Paranormally Correct, but I'm sure you knew that because it's Thursday night, and on Thursday it's always Paranormally Correct. And tonight I have a wonderful guest co-host, Jenny Stewart, and me and Jenny have a wonderful guest tonight, Ted Phillips. I think when we took off for the commercial break, we were just getting ready to dig into some really good UFO ghost type stuff, weren't we? We want to get into that, Jenny?
Yeah.
About attachments? Do you want me to ask an attachment question?
Oh, yeah, because I'm really interested in this. I love the correlations between UFO and paranormal stuff. It's so cool.
Well, I've had to deal for several years with spirit attachments and how to deal with them, and I was a big advocate for helping people start becoming more educated on them, and I understand how it makes me feel and some of the things that I endure when I do have an attachment. And so I wanted to find out from you, Ted, what your take is on us, because I'm really excited that you even knew what it was. Spirit attachment and the correlation between maybe aliens and UFO sightings. Do you believe that there is something there?
Well, at this point, really. I'm relatively new in the paranormal research, about 2 years, and the last year especially. But so I haven't formed a lot of opinions on what exactly we're looking at in the paranormal and the apparitions, the shadow figures, all these different things, because I have such good, high-quality witnesses. And believe me, after 50 years, I know how to determine a high-quality, high-strangeness, credible witness. And what it's so cool that you want to ask about the attachment thing, because I have just started, at the request of a law enforcement agency, some of the most credible witnesses that God ever made. And they have asked me to investigate this house. It's a very isolated. It's no one living in it for many years. No electrical lines attached to it. It's just out there by itself. And it is insanely haunted, to use the word. And one of the events, surprisingly, I get requests from law enforcement people, various agencies that want to be absolutely out of the picture. Like one of the good ones was with the ATF. And, you know, these people, a lot of these people are on stakeouts out in the middle of flat nowhere, and they hear and they see things. And they're curious enough, they're smart enough, they want to try to learn more about it very quietly. And so anyway, that's what's happening with this, and I am so stoked to get to this place. And what just happened is that one of the officers, among several, was at the place, and he had lived there many years ago as a young man. And at that time, everyone in the house had seen an apparition, full body, of an old man accompanied by a young boy. And even down to how they were dressed and so on. They were seen at night, they were seen in the daylight, and so on. And so it was just kind of standard fare at this house. But he had not told any of his fellow officers about this, about the old man and the kid. And one of the other officers who had been there, and they captured incredible EVPs and so on, was sitting almost a week later, at his home, watching TV in the afternoon, and his son comes in, and he says, "Hey, Dad," he says, "who's the old man with the little kid?" And he says, "What?" And he says, "They're standing in the hallway." And he runs in there, and not only his son saw it, but he did. And that's a pretty good confirmation story. Extremely credible people, and his son not knowing anything about it, and he actually not knowing anything about the old guy and the little child. And yet it appears there as it did at this old house. And I'm getting more and more instances where things do seem to follow people back home that have investigated, and not often, but occasionally. So you need to email me some information on how do you deal with that, because I think one of these days I'm going to be in the middle of it. And,
I would love to. I'll definitely, any questions you have about, it was trial and error for me, but it's just now, I think the community as a whole is just now becoming more aware of the fact that it happens, and I'll definitely email you after the show and give you my contact information and all that good stuff, and share some of our horror attachment stories. So we actually did a show
we'll
on it.
exchange some of this stuff.
Yeah.
You know, I've had interesting experiences over all these many years in many places, and at Marley, I had, I think, the strangest. One night, it was supposed to get down to about 5 degrees, and it's in the area where all this extremely bad cattle stuff has happened. And as you might imagine, when I'm out and about, I'm very, very cautious. I keep an open mind, but I'm always leaning a little bit to the let's prove this as best we can, or at least give it some credibility or not. So I'm very, very careful. I don't go out there screaming and running through fields. And at my age, I couldn't anyway. But on this particular night, I got down to Marley, and Tom and Adam were, some of the team members were coming down from St. Louis, and we're getting there later. And while it was still daylight, since it was going down to 5 degrees with wind, I thought, well, this old shed that I set up all the monitors and everything in, kind of home base, was just open with chicken wire all the way down one side and the front, leading up to a doorway which had no door. So I had brought a whole herd of tarps, and I bungeed those all the way around to break the wind. And I had put one over this doorway. And I'm sitting there at 10 minutes, 20 minutes till 9. And I just talked to the guys, and they were about 20 or so minutes out. And so I'm sitting there 12 feet from what would be the doorway with the tarp over it. And all of a sudden I hear this just terrific noise, very awkward, heavy, moderately fast footsteps, only this was something big. And it was coming through the brush right along the southwest corner of the shed. And, of course, I couldn't see it for the tarps. And, I mean, it was crunching things down. And so I get up, and I had a Coleman lantern hanging from the ceiling, and I got up in front of it. And this thing continued on down to the doorway with the tarp, and it stopped. And absolute silence. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe this is the caretaker of the farm. Then I remember that he left an hour and a half ago in a pickup with an extremely loud muffler, and I had not heard that muffler come back. And I stood up, and as I stood up, my shadow was cast on the inside area of the tarp, and as though something had put like 3 of its fingers together to make a pointer, 5 feet above the ground, the tarp is indented. It's pushed in towards me and back, opening up about a foot-wide gap at the end of it, and I'm thinking somebody's going to look through that gap. And I'm standing there 12 feet from this, and I said, hello? And I got a little more aggressive and a little more volume as I went on. And I'm standing there. I chambered around on the pistol, and the thing goes back. Tarp's hanging there. No sound. Not a sound. No breathing, nothing. And I walked 4 feet closer. Well, I'm 8 feet from this tarp. I could have heard anything that was going on, and there was nothing. And in comes the tarp again, pushed in, and by like a stub, and pushed in and back, and it now has like a 1.5 wide gap between the tarp and the north side of the door opening. And I'm at this point, I'm wishing, hoping nothing looks through there, because this was a creepy, creepy deal. And so I yelled a couple of times. I said, you know, I'm armed, and I will. And it just stood there, just like it was contemplating what to do next. And the tarp goes back. falls back, and I hear this terrible noise as it goes off onto the north in front of the shed through really, really heavy brush. And then the sound just stopped instantly. And so I ran to the door, and I looked out, and I could see all the damage, but there was nothing down in the direction that it had gone. And down in that direction, I found, when the guys got there minutes later, that there was or is a large cattle chute made out of 4x4s, really heavy-duty stuff. And this, whatever it was, would have had to have climbed up 6 feet over that to get out, because it was the corner of a fence, barbed wire fence there. And there was no hair, there was no indication of scratching as it was going up the wood, and there was no noise like the wood scratching. And I got to tell you, that floored me. And to be there by yourself in a position like that, you have, several minutes really went by to think about it, to consider. And it was considering on the other side of the tarp at the same time. It didn't scare me all that much. I went from a 9mm.
That's the way to do it.
I have dead people come to my house all the time. So I make a joke of it, and I tell people I talk to them all the time. So the thing I hate the most is when they say hey to me. I hate for them to do that, because I keep telling them, if you're going to talk to me, you have to say something other than hey, or I won't speak to you. So I'm used to it by now. But that would be scary for me, the story that you described. But yeah, I will definitely make sure that I can get some information to you about attachments and protection and things like that. And so that way you can, as you further your research with the paranormal, you can at least protect yourself from having some of those occurrences happen.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's really important. Thing. My wife insists that she got me a little cross, and she said always wear that, and I do it more or less to appease her. I don't know how much good it would do, but anyway, very quickly, the other project that I'm starting on outside of this haunted house, which I am so anxious to get to, going to be about a week. But in Marley itself, there is a building that I've named the Old Factory. And this thing, there was the owner of the land, his ancestors, at the end of the Civil War, built this wonderful house. And the foundation is still there. The house, of course, is gone. And they built this old factory building on that foundation, and which could be some reason for the activity. But at any rate, the people that are working have been working in there, and they have 24-hour shifts. They have to work all night, and then they have the daylight shift and all that. And almost immediately, I started hearing stories from the workers of shadow figures. And these are people that were hired locally. These are people that don't even believe in ghosts. And they're hunters, and they're used to being out in the dark at night. They're not afraid of the dark. And one of my team members' husband actually worked there. And he had the experience, and he was the biggest skeptic that you could ever meet until that point. But for example, one night, 3 of them were working in there, and all of a sudden all the doors start opening and closing, lights going off and on. And this finally settles down. That's a very typical thing that goes there. And they saw this through the wall, a black thing that they said looked like the shell of a huge turtle, couple of feet, 3 feet, and but it was made up of a black, smoky, fog-like stuff, and it comes through the wall about 4 feet into the room, which is the room in front of their location, and it leaps from the floor 10 feet up onto the wall across the room, which is almost 20 feet away. And it's just hanging on the side of the wall, and they see two extensions come out that look like front legs, two come out of the back, and it looks like a headless turtle with the legs. And then it leaps from the side of the wall over to the ceiling, goes upside down across the ceiling and through the wall that it came in. And that sort of stuff. And they've seen human configuration shadow people. And the first kind of the opening event, a young lady, 27 years old, was working the night shift. She was there by herself, and she was about to finish up. It's close to 9 o'clock. And all of a sudden, she has this feeling of great, great sorrow and fear and depression. I mean, it just hits her like bang. And she starts crying. And she doesn't understand this because there's no reason. And so she goes through the building and out the big main front door. And she's standing there, and she sees an enormous black cloud, for any other description, coming down, and it's blocking all the stars out. It blocks out the buildings across the parking area, and it's like it's just covered the entire building. And the doors start the opening and closing, the lights on and off, and you can imagine what it would be like to be in the middle of that situation. And she tries to call her boyfriend, who's coming to get her. Well, her cell phone's dead. Nothing's working. And she runs back into the back room, the office room, and as she goes through the doorway, she sees on the right, standing, leaning against the wall 6 feet away, a guy, very, very tall, 6, 7 feet tall, in the configuration of a black shadow figure. And she could see it had some kind of a hat on its head, and the face appeared to be more like an animal of some sort than a human face. And that did it. And she started screaming and crying and ran across the building, and it all instantly stopped. And she went out the front door, the blackness was gone, and her boyfriend was driving up the lane. And this is out truly in the middle of nowhere. And that kind of stuff going on there almost every night, and sometimes in daylight at the end of the day or before sunrise. And I just got permission to investigate that place, so I'll be going ahead very shortly.
You have to let me know how that turns out, because that sounds like my hell house that I moved out of. We're actually running out of time, and we have a couple callers. No, we still have time, a little bit of time, but we have a couple callers that have been patiently waiting to get on air to ask you a question. So we're going to bring in Miss Sarah Harmon, who's from our very own. She hosts a show here on Paramania called The Skeleton Key. It's moved to Tuesday night. So Sarah, are you there?
I'm still here. How are you?
Hi, sweetie. How are you?
Sharon. Hi, Sharon.
Hi. You know, I was calling because, one, Ted, I think the research you're doing is absolutely fantastic, and Jenny and Sarah are doing a great job bringing it into the paranormal and talking about some of the parallels, and I definitely can empathize with that, because that's kind of what I deal with alternative therapy and helping people who've been or believe that they've been abducted, or people who have paranormal instances that they're trying to cope with. And, you know, one of the things that I've noticed is there seems to be a lot of emotional patterns and a lot of patterns in the environment, things that definitely both in the paranormal and in ufology seem to reoccur. And, you know, one of the things that I wanted to ask you, because you've been doing this for so long, is do you notice any patterns? For example, a lot of the people that believe they've been abducted have anxiety that it's going to happen again because they went 25 years never having an experience, and then all of a sudden they seem to have them all of the time. And people in the paranormal seem to have that too. Do you notice anything like that in your research?
Absolutely, and that is a great, great question. Yeah, my wife, actually, she started picking up on that sort of the side of it, because I was I was always, first of all, attacking the physical evidence so it doesn't get away from me, weather, whatever, and then talking with the witnesses and going through the whole case, the history, and all that stuff. And so there were a lot of things I just didn't have the time to think about or pursue beyond the actual event, the physical event. And so my wife would talk with the witnesses along those lines, thank goodness, and she would tell me about the parallels. And for example, one of my very best cases, and we don't have time to talk about it, but Delphos, Kansas, a 16-year-old boy saw this object 35, 40 feet away, and it did this beautiful landing site, and all kinds of effects, all kinds of witnesses. Wonderful case, and extremely believable. And I went back to talk to him, several times, but that happened in 1971. And I went back the last time, talked to him in 1998 as a grown adult with 2 kids and a nurse for a wife who's just a wonderful person. And to this day, he will not tell me everything that happened while he was standing out there many minutes while this thing was 5 feet above the ground. And I really pushed him. I said, look, I'm old, I'll be dead, I'd like to know what all happened here. And he said, I can't tell you because they'll take my kids. And he honestly believes this. He honestly believes this. And his wife, now you'll like this, they're coming back from a movie just before they were married. And they're driving home, driving down the highway, and all of a sudden she said, Ron, she said, what happened while you were out there? And he, just off the cuff, he started to tell her, and he started choking, and he couldn't breathe. And she, being a nurse, she grabs the steering wheel, gets the car off on the side of the road, and started working on him. And she thought he was going to strangle to death just at trying to tell her. And he fully believes, and she does too, that there is something still going on. Now that's difficult to imagine, but how do you ignore that?
Yeah.
But the cool thing is, after I hit him with "I'll be dead," he felt sorry for me, and he gave me a partial answer. He said, "Have you ever heard of a case where balls of electricity would come out of one of these objects and come close to the person?" And I said, "Yeah, I have, Ron. Is that what happened?" And he turned around and he walked out of the house. So,
wow.
So there you go. Who knows what all happened there, but
I hate to jump in there because it's such a great conversation, and we're running out of time. We honestly are. And
I know.
I could stay here for 2 more hours.
I know we could. I know. Well, thank you, Ted, for that. That helps me out quite a bit, actually. So keep on keeping on, and I'll be looking you up.
You too. You keep going. That's good stuff.
Miss Sarah will have to get you on as a guest on her show. She actually has a show here
also
called Skeleton Key, so that would be awesome.
Yeah.
Look, I'm setting you up on shows, Ted, so I'm booking you while you're on air, so I'm actually on the network.
All right.
So I can do that. I definitely have enjoyed this.
This is always fun.
I was a little apprehensive because, again, I'm not the UFO researcher. I'm the paranormal researcher, but I can actually see now that what seems so, alien, no pun intended, alienated to me because I didn't have enough information, now seems like they're very parallel. So I'm actually glad I was asked to fill in for the wonderful Chad McKenzie, who is under the weather. Hopefully he'll feel better soon. And I definitely will be in contact with you, Ted, and send you my contact information.
Absolutely, please.
Sarah, do you want to close out your show? I did it for you. Sorry.
Well, this has just been such a great show, and like Jenny said, we could just keep going because it is so awesome. Jenny, thank you so much for coming on tonight, and Ted, awesome, awesome conversation, awesome stories. I hate it that we ran out of time.
It has been fun, and I've enjoyed it. You guys did a really great job. A lot of good questions. And, there are the standard questions that you typically get, and it is refreshing to get those really good ones that you guys have. And we'll have to talk again, and please stay in touch.
Definitely. Thank you for opening my eyes to your research, and I'm glad that you're now dabbling in the kind of research I do. So it's going to be great. But I'll definitely be in touch. And Sarah, thank you for having me on anytime.
And thank all of you for tuning in, all of you in the chat room. I know there's a lot of people out there. Hope you all enjoyed the show. Tune in next week. We've got some really big stuff coming up. Check out our Facebook page, facebook.com/paranormallycorrect. And we will see you next Thursday right here on Paramania Radio.